Have you ever wondered what happens when magic and giggles mix together? Well, in Miss Burney's magical classroom, her students are about to find out in the most spectacular way possible. It was just another enchanted morning in Miss Burney's classroom. The sun sparkled through the rainbow-tinted windows, casting colorful shadows on the floating textbooks and dancing pencils. Miss Burney, with her star-speckled robes and twinkling eyes, was teaching her students about the art of bubble making. Little Aee Jaee, known for his boundless curiosity, sat at the front of the class, his wand practically bouncing with excitement. Next to him, Angel twirled her silver hair ribbon, while Jedi adjusted his apprentice cape for the 100th time. Zee Zeee, the most enthusiastic of the bunch, could barely stay in his seat as Miss Burney began the lesson. "Today, my dear bright bunch," Miss Burney announced with a warm smile, "we're going to create the most magnificent bubbles you've ever seen." She waved her wand in elegant circles, producing shimmering rainbow-colored bubbles that danced through the air like tiny ballet dancers. The students watched in awe as the bubbles pirouetted around the room. But then Aee Jaee had an idea. "Miss Burney," he called out, waving his hand frantically, "what if we made the bubbles more fun?" Before anyone could stop him, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a sparkling pouch of giggle dust. Angel's eyes widened. "Aee Jaee, wait!" But it was too late. With a flourish, Aee Jaee tossed a pinch of giggle dust into the air. The dust immediately merged with Miss Burney's bubbles, and something extraordinary happened. The bubbles began to laugh. At first, it was delightful. Hundreds of bubbles filled the room, each one giggling with its own unique sound. Some had deep belly laughs, while others had tiny, musical giggles that sounded like tinkling bells. Zee Zeee clapped his hands in delight as a particularly jolly bubble bounced off her nose. But then the giggles grew louder and the bubbles started multiplying. For every pop, 2 more bubbles appeared, each laughing harder than the last. Soon the classroom was filled with a symphony of unstoppable laughter and an ever-growing army of giggling bubbles. "Oh dear," Miss Burney said, trying to maintain her composure as a bubble whooshed past her ear, cackling like a hyena. "This is quite the magical mishap." The bubbles were now bouncing off the walls, the ceiling, and even the magical portraits, whose occupants were covering their ears from all the laughing. Jedi, always the strategic thinker, pulled out his notebook. "We need a plan," he declared, dodging a particularly enthusiastic bubble that seemed determined to nest in his hair. "These bubbles are powered by happiness, so maybe we need something serious to calm them down?" Angel's face lit up. "What about Professor Pomfrey's perfectly proper potion?" she suggested. "It makes everything prim and proper." But when they tried it, the bubbles just put on tiny invisible monocles and started laughing in posh, sophisticated voices. The situation was getting out of hand. The giggling bubbles had formed a conga line near the ceiling, and the classroom's resident phoenix was trying to hide under its wings. Even the usually unflappable Miss Burney was starting to look concerned as her magical lesson plans were carried away by a group of particularly mischievous bubbles. Zee Zeee, who had been quietly observing, suddenly jumped up. "I've got it!" he exclaimed. "What's the opposite of giggles? Yawns!" He immediately began demonstrating, letting out an enormous yawn that seemed to catch the attention of the nearest bubbles. The bright bunch caught on quickly. Soon, all 5 of them were yawning dramatically, and something amazing started to happen. The bubbles began to slow down, their giggles turning into tired little chuckles. One by one, they started to drift lazily through the air, their laughter becoming softer and softer. Miss Burney, seeing the effect, quickly conjured up a giant magical bubble net. As the sleepy bubbles floated down, she and her students gently caught them, each one giving a final tiny giggle before peacefully popping into sparkles that disappeared into thin air. When the last bubble had been caught, the classroom fell into a blissful silence. The bright bunch looked around at the aftermath. Textbooks askew, magical artifacts scattered about, and glittering remnants of giggle dust settling on every surface. Miss Burney surveyed her students with a mixture of exasperation and pride. "Well," she said, straightening her slightly disheveled robes, "I suppose we've all learned an important lesson about mixing magic without permission." She paused, then added with a twinkle in her eye, "Though I must admit those were the most entertaining bubbles I've ever seen in all my years of teaching." The classroom erupted in laughter, regular, non-magical laughter this time. As they began tidying up, AJ carefully tucked his pouch of giggle dust deep into his pocket. Though he couldn't help but wonder what other magical mischief they might encounter in their next lesson. After all, in Miss Burney's magical classroom, even the smallest spark of creativity could lead to the most extraordinary adventures.